Good afternoon. My name is Tom Glazier, and I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to the New America Foundation to discuss just how we might be able to encourage civic participation and social innovation. For those of you watching on the web, there's quite a large number of you, I understand, this afternoon. New America is a DC-based public policy institute looking to new ideas and new thinkers to address the next generation of challenges facing the United States. Our mission, New America, embraces through 15 programs that cover everything from counterterrorism to education and economic growth, both here in DC and in California. I lead our work here on media policy as part of a team housed within the Open Technology Initiative, where we have been considering how the changing media and technological landscape affects citizens' participation in democracy. Powered by an energetic and geographically distributed group of 8 other fellows, 2 research associates, and numerous interns, we've been conducting research into ideas that support a healthy community from an information perspective. The report we use as a starting point, the Knight Commission report on sustaining democracy in a digital age, reads that promoting engagement means generating opportunities and motivation for involvement, and it requires citizens with the capacity, both individually and in groups, to help shoulder responsibility for community self-governance. That starting point we use our approach is premised on the idea that individuals need 3 things to participate in a democratic society: relevant and credible information, the education needed to engage with that information, and opportunities to participate in the public life in their community. Technology is clearly part of what is changing in communities, but so are the ways people organize for innovation. On our website, you'll find 5 studies that consider the information environments of Seattle, Scranton, Raleigh-Durham and Chapel Hill, which is a single study, Washington, D.C. and Minneapolis. And over the next few months, you'll see the policy ideas that build on these analyses. In the course of this research, I've been collaborating with Ben Schneiderman, Professor of Computer Science and Founding Director of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab at the University of Maryland, and Jenny Priest, Professor and Dean of the College of Information Studies, also at Maryland. And I contributed to one of the articles they will reference in their presentation that centers really on the idea of technology-mediated social participation. And it's out of that work that we've invited them here today to speak. However, rather than just talk about technology in isolation, I wanted us to take an opportunity to place these questions in a broader context. And it was with this rationale that I invited Sonal Shah, who is sitting at the front and will come to the stage in a moment, to share some thoughts about the hard work of social innovation and civic participation from the perspective of someone working at the center of the federal government. Since April 2009, Sonal has served as the director of the new Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation in the White House, where she is also the deputy assistant to the president. Prior to this, she'd worked in the Department of the Treasury during the Clinton administration, where she had an international focus she took to the Center for Global Development, the Center for American Progress, Wall Street, and then latterly Google, where she served as head of Google's development initiatives. Also joining us this afternoon is Ginny Hunt, who's currently at Google, works at Google, whom I met in her former career as a political organizer and foreign policy analyst before she joined Google 4 years ago. At Google, she now leads public sector programs and product development, which is a part of Google Research. As she's been working at the cutting edge of public sector innovation, or to mix metaphors, prospecting for participation gold, I know she will have a lot to add. In short, we have some fine minds here to focus on the issues of social innovation, civic participation, and technology's role in it. In terms of the program, we will have a presentation from Jen and Benny, then a response from Sonal, and after which we will have a panel with Ginny and the speakers. But before I start, I will mention that this event is being, as I said earlier, live streamed on the web, and everything is on the record forever, or at least as long as Google can find it. Ginny, maybe you can answer that, how long that is. For those of you on Twitter, use the hashtag NAF event, and we'll keep an eye on your questions during the panel and Q&A. So, without further delay, and since I like to make sure we leave some time for less formal conversation after the panel, I'd like to thank you all for coming and ask you to please join me in welcoming Jen and Benny in their presentation.
Thank you, Tom. All right, appreciate the introduction and the opportunity today to talk about a topic that's become increasingly important to us, and we hope to you as well. Can we dim the lights in the front on the screen so others can see? But all right. And as Tom said, we're both at the University of Maryland, and we've had the pleasure of working on this topic together in the past few years. Jenny, of course, has been a leader in this topic. Her book from the year 2000 on online communities was a pioneering research effort in this direction. It's no surprise then, of course, that at least this set of topics, which are identified in the articles that you've got out in the IEEE issue that's outside for you to take copies, these were identified as 12 areas that were national priorities that could benefit from advanced applications of the currently popular social media technologies. So the journalists are filled with the glowing reports of what could be done, but equally there are challenges and dangers, and that's why this remains an open question. The majority of wikis fail. Not every social media event is a great success story, and there are serious problems with the malicious attacks, the privacy violations, the lack of trust that many people feel, the failure to be universal, an important issue not only just for disabled access, but for a wide range of citizens to promote the diverse access to these important technologies, and then the reliability when they are needed. So the misuse, of course, by these technologies by terrorists and criminals, promoters of racial hatred. The Simon Wiesenthal Center catalogs 11,500 websites devoted to racial hatred. And so there are serious problems in that malefactors are equally able to use this technology, and understanding how to put these to good work are what we believe is an important research agenda. We began working on this more than a year ago. An informal gathering of 25 researchers came to College Park in April and prepared this 50-page white paper, which is still available on the web. They paid their own way, which was an important signifier of the strong interest. And at about the same time, an article that I had written describing this idea of a national initiative for social participation was published in AAAS Science. The claim is that if we see the economic downturn as the Sputnik of our age, then we need to launch a NASA-level effort of social media research to turn around. That notion has been promoted by many others by now. Just in the past week or two, Don Tapscott's new book, Macro Wikinomics, makes that same claim. And here, appropriately on my iPad, is the cover, at least, of this, and it's Rebooting Business and the World. Nothing less ambitious than that, but I think many people have come to recognize that these technologies represent our Gutenberg moment, and that we need a substantial effort to promote advanced research in this area. To make that happen, Jenny was the leader, principal investigator, myself, and Peter Paroli of Park together proposed to the NSF to run 2 workshops, which they supported, and these were run, one in Palo Alto to bring together leaders from industry as well as West Coast academics, and then a second one in April earlier this year in the Washington area near NSF headquarters to bring together East Coast academics plus more government and NGO related participants. There's a large number of people who participated, the organizers, there was an advisory committee, and we had some 60 participants, and we're very proud to have brought some excellent graduate students to participate in that activity so that we had the broadest range of insights possible. So that resulted in the 7 articles that are in that special issue that just appeared a few weeks ago, and that's what's triggered today's event, this special issue on technology-mediated social participation, and I'll pass to Jenny to tell you a little bit about what the contents are.
And Ben mentioned graduate students, and one of the things I wanted to comment on as in my role as Dean of the College of Information Studies, Maryland's iSchool, one of the things that I've been noticing over the last couple of years is the phenomenal interest from young people from graduate school, from graduate students in working on these kinds of topics, studying them, sometimes going off and starting up their own companies, but certainly wanting to use these technologies for all kinds of things other than discretionary social interaction. But what I wanted to talk to you about is this particular special edition. You'll see that there are some copies of that outside, and I hope there are enough for all of you, so please help yourselves. We held the 2 workshops, and a number of topics were identified and are written about in those special editions. Tom mentioned that he was involved, and I think there are other people in this room who were also involved. There was a large number of people either centrally or on the outskirts, and we worked together on this as teams with team leaders. The first article talks about the sort of science foundations. We believe that deep science research is needed in these areas to fully understand and to understand the relationship between the technology, the uptake by people, and what motivates people to use these technologies and to participate with each other. We talked about the need for understanding the advancing issues of design of these technologies within the sort of socio-technical context. We talked about the vision of sharing these platforms, sharing the technologies, increasing sharing, I think, even more than we're seeing at the moment. And over the last few years, of course, this has increased considerably. There was a particularly interesting work group that was very, very active in the health area, looking at a whole variety of different aspects of health. One on education, which we were talking about earlier, looks at education very much as a lifelong activity, something that takes place from very young children right up to older adults, where we're all continually learning and we're participating with others to learn. We looked at the engaging people in open government, and I believe this was the one Tom was most involved with, something that's very important, I think, to this group. The use of social media to encourage participation and transparency in government. And much of what initiated our early discussions about this was the Obama government's mention and their commitment to transparency with the various websites, recovery.gov and others, which are available to the public to see what's going on. There is the possibility for people to comment. And we felt particularly strongly that this is an important move for the future. We've divided this presentation, this part of the presentation, really into 4 groups. We've talked a little bit so far about these national priorities, and those are the things that we've just gone through that have publications in the special edition of the IEEE Computer we've just mentioned. The next thing that I would like to talk about is a little bit some of the ideas of the underpinning theories for research in this area, and also particularly for future research. And I think one of the very important things about this is that with these technologies, we move forward even more than we have been doing over the last 10 years or the last 15 years into a research paradigm that is certainly multidisciplinary. Often universities have been known in the past, 10, 20 years ago, for being very siloed institutions. Another trend that I'm seeing as dean at Maryland and across a number of other different universities is the move to increasing interdisciplinary research. And of course, this is something that the funding agencies, NSF, and others are strongly encouraging through their funding programs. So with that in mind, I wanted just to put up a couple of slides about some of the underpinning theories that we're interested in and people working in this area are paying attention to. Early work in this area really started with the physicists in the technology area, looking at networking, and has moved increasingly to involve people from computer science, particularly John Kleinbeck from Cornell, Yuri Leskovich, and many others, looking at the social networking technologies and involving increasingly the social scientists and people from many, many different areas of science and other academic areas as well. Indeed, at the University of Maryland, we held a one-day meeting called The Future of Information, and it was extremely interesting to see that we had a number of participants. We actually had about 200 people turn up to that, and they came from all 12 colleges. So I think that really demonstrates the interest in this area. So thinking about some of these kinds of technologies, and indeed looking also at sort of some of the base fundamental theoretical basis that comes also from sociology, social psychology, these kinds of areas, looking particularly at motivation, a theory that Ben and I have both been looking at in different ways in projects that we're involved with, is this one from Batson that looks particularly at what motivates people. Is it egoism that encourages them? Is it altruism? Is it some sort of collectivism? Or is it some kinds of principles? And this is a pretty well established theory, and we're looking at how it applies within these areas of collaboration using some of these new media technologies. And of course, in many respects, it's many of those at different times, and sometimes it involves one or two of those at the same time. But I think the important point is perhaps not just these individual theories, but the need to really understand in some kind of deep way what it is that people do with these technologies, how what they do changes over time as they get more used to using them, and also what motivates them or what does not motivate them. As Ben mentioned, I've worked in this broad area since about the early to mid-90s, and certainly at that time, one of the key things that I got phone calls about was I've put up, a community platform, community technology. Nobody's using it. Why aren't they using it? And you go and look at that in that space, and you see that there's very little going on there. So understanding what motivates people and knowing how to ramp up these participation in these technologies very early on to create the buzz that's necessary, I think is really important. And it's an area that a number of researchers are now turning their attentions to. And that includes us. From the very early days, we looked at such things as what encouraged people to contribute, to come back, and then to become more regular contributors. And many of these platforms that we think of as successes, of course, things like Wikipedia, which undoubtedly I think is a success, but what people perhaps don't know is that it's only one person in every 1,000 that registers and actually contributes anything. A lot of us just use it in a variety of ways as links to other kinds of information. And for something like Wikipedia, that's perhaps not a problem because there are a lot of contributors there. But for starting new companies, new initiatives, there's an important issue about how you actually get people involved. Ben and I have been working on this. We put this forward as an initial kind of theory. It's built on the work of at least 120 other research papers that are all refereed in refereed journals. So I feel okay about putting this up because what we have done is try to draw this work together into a framework, looking at what happens when people come in, when they become readers, how they move from reading to contributing, how they move from contributing to collaborating, and eventually becoming leaders. And we've fully recognized that, of course, this isn't just a straight path through, that people may take different routes through this. They may take different routes according to even the topic. For example, within Wikipedia, you may be an expert in one area, you may be a novice in another area. So it very much varies, but we put this forward as maybe a theoretical framework that we can test new developments, new communities against, to kind of track some of these activities and get a deeper understanding of actually what's going on in these community spaces. And there is, in fact, quite a lot of literature out there that when pulled together, it can be very helpful. Some of it sort of tells us things that now most developers take as being pretty obvious, like the importance of putting up a lot of new material so that people are continually drawn back. Other things are perhaps a little less obvious, but when you think about them and you observe people, they really make sense. And one of these suggestions comes from a researcher on online communities, Etienne Wenger, who pointed out that actually, if you design your software to support just quite small changes and quite small interactions, and in the case of Wikipedia, this has been found to be very much the case. People go in and they will maybe change a spelling. They will do a small little edit. And it's really a way of putting a toe in the water, feeling how people react to you, feeling how what you do is responded to, and basically building up some confidence. And there's a whole lot of those things. So in this paper in which we've analysed 120 or so published articles, we've tried to draw some of those together. So there is quite a lot of research on different pieces of this problem. The really big issue is that there is very little in terms of an overriding theory to help us to move forward with understanding and with the practice. And of course, that it's a particularly, I think, problem in many areas, but it's particularly difficult in this one because interaction is very strongly affected by the context. So what happens in a health community may be very different to what happens in a children's community or a community of scientists and so on. And now I'm going to hand back to Ben.
Jenny's quick tour through the science just gives you a taste of what we think are really the profound scientific challenges of our time. As much as the Large Hadron Collider and finding the Higgs boson may be important, we think understanding the motivation for individual helping one another is probably equally important scientific challenge. And if we could launch a chain reaction of human collaboration, that would certainly unleash a lot of energy that we think would be very valuable and important. So there's a deep science challenge here for computer scientists, for physicists, for sociologists, for every discipline, and actually the application domains we're working on. Jenny's working with the Encyclopedia of Life, a project with the Smithsonian that contributes to biodiversity information. I'm working on the Nation of Neighbors, which contributes to community safety. Those are giving us a practical foundation to try out these scientific theories. And the theory she mentioned of Batson's, we are sending 4 different letters of invitation for people to participate in this Nation of Neighbors community, and they're based on egoism, altruism, communalism, and principlism. They evoke those aspects, and we'll find out in the next months, we hope, how effective each of those appeals are. At the same time, there are deep technology challenges to making this work. This is not trivial. This is not a done deal. Making it scalable, making it work, making it reliable is really tough. Going the whole range from mobile to desktop to web and cloud is one span of things. Making it integrated, seamless is the easy word to say, but making it work across all those platforms is important. And guaranteeing 100% uptime, 100% secure is really tough, especially to talk about in the week of WikiLeaks, right? So these are really, really tough issues that are not yet solved. The reliability is really is a central issue, especially for things like disaster response systems, where the peak load may be 10 to 100 times the normal load. And planning for and testing even for such eventualities becomes a genuine deep technological challenge. Scaling up from the 10,000 servers to 10 million servers is not going to be easy. And ensuring, well, 1 CPU per user is what we really want to be there in the cloud. Okay. The other issues, we have to change the metrics. Moore's law has been effective for 40 years in guiding us to petaflops and gigabytes and megahertz. But really, to measure our success in the coming years, we will need to look and measure the number of gigacollabs and teracontribs, and maybe the giga thank yous and the many different ways in which success of the human endeavor is measured, not just the number of bytes transferred. I've mentioned already the universal accessibility and usability as central issues if this is to become a reliable platform for national priorities. And then when the journalists ask me what's the next hot thing, the next killer app, I say trust, empathy, responsibility, and privacy. If we can understand how to make those things happen, we will build a successful set of systems. Finally, these tools, these systems won't just get built and work. They will require management. They will require supervision. They will require community leaders and systems managers who are continuously refining, evolving, and putting these to work. Just as my PhD student spent the summer working at Twitter and was so successful there that they hired him away permanently, the need for people to be involved in managing these systems and making sure they're effective is really essential. And so there's a large technology challenge in designing tools for community managers and for system managers that will support continuous improvement. Our effort along the way, I couldn't resist to show this, a slide of our work. This project, supported by Microsoft External Research during the past 4 years, developed a free open source tool called NodeXL, and we just published the book in September. So this tells the story. This screen of NodeXL shows data I thought some might find appealing. This is the voting patterns in the U.S. Senate during the 2007 year. You can see the red Republicans and the blue Democrats completely separated. The two yellow independents are on with the vote with the Democrats, but I think the remarkable thing from the 2007 data showed that Specter, Collins, and Snow were in between, and those who followed it in January 2009, those were the three Republicans who crossed over to vote for the stimulus bill. So this kind of analysis and these kind of strategies for data analysis and visual layout and presentation, we believe, are very powerful. Finally, I close just as a large agenda for us as a research roadmap and of taking this vision out. We need your help for this, but we hope we've done something to identify the ambitious research themes, and we've tried to do our best to develop consensus among colleagues so there's a unified belief about what the next steps are. We want to engage. This is not just for one discipline, but every discipline will be impacted by this, by contributing to this research and benefiting from it. It's, I think, interesting, as Jenny pointed out, all 12 colleges at Maryland participated, and NSF has a internal task group on social media. All 7 divisions of NSF participate in that. This is a profound change, and those people who can see farther into the future understand very well its strong impact. We hope to work with journalists and the public to make the case that this is really a powerful transformation, and we've already worked with industry and government agencies to help them produce early pilot studies and test out these ideas. We do want to, and we're doing today, communicating with policymakers, and on our own campuses, we're creating new courses and degree programs. It's, to me, quite exciting that the Computing Research Association, in its annual report about the fields of computer science and the research, added this year a 19th field to computer science, which was social computing, social informatics. So there is movement. The National Institute of Health has opened 2 programs under its Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research to support social media for health. The NSF has a small effort called Social Computational Systems, which we hope will dramatically grow, but we see the need for much, much more to be done. And we hope you'll read the review and that we've made the case strongly and join us in making this transformation a successful one. Thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to discussion and questions. Thank you, Tom.
Please. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for laying out the large research agenda and many principles that we need to explore further. And with that, I'll hand over to Sonal, perhaps with the idea that you may be able to explain the idea of starting a chain reaction of social innovation and civic participation. But I'm not sure.
That's a pretty big topic in itself. I think I have had the pleasure of listening to Ben and Jenny when they came to NSF on a research project, and I think this is a pretty important discussion. And what I thought I would lay out for you is in a bit of a term of kind of how it works from a government agency, and it's a fairly narrow perspective in the sense of what are some of the challenges that we'll face, but where are the opportunities in order to leverage the research and what's being done in terms of social media and social participation. I run an office in the government in the Domestic Policy Council called the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. And let me start with kind of definitions really quickly. So on the social side, we're really looking at social services agencies and where we can solve social problems and how we can address that. And on innovation, we're looking at not invention, we're looking at scaling good ideas and how those can replicate, how they can scale, how they can become the chain reactions, but what are the types of innovations that we can help support, and thinking about the government not as necessarily the inventor, but the ability to help scale. And the civic participation piece of this has been fairly critical. I don't know that we always talk about it enough, but while social innovations are important, the civic participation, recognizing that it is what happens in communities is where problems are being solved. And the activation of those communities to solve problems is almost is just as important as the innovation side. While their innovations are good, the question is, how do we activate communities to solve problems, whether it's using and leveraging technology effectively, whether it's getting information accordingly to communities so they can do something with it. But really that part beyond kind of the technology and what the technology can do to actually getting people to go and do something about it. And one part of that is supporting national service, which is building the leadership that can at least start working in communities that can do some of this work. But that's not in itself enough. We recognize that there's a lot more to be done on civic participation. So given that that's where the office is, let me just respond briefly to Ben and Jenny's presentation, but also leave open to a lot more questions. I think a conversation will be probably much more effective, and then we can have a longer conversation about this. Our biggest challenge, and I would tell you from the government perspective, is participation, not just voting. It's about participating to solve local problems. Whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in energy, whether it is how do we get beyond the supporting of the cause or supporting of the idea to actually doing something about it. And that is the single greatest challenge when it comes to civic participation that I think if we can get to, what are those behaviors that change, and what is it that motivates behavior change to happen? So I might recommend, Ben and Jenny, as you look at kind of the researchers that you work with, looking at behavioral economists and what are motivations that get people to act. Because I think while the technologies can exist and we can invest a lot in the technologies, what we need to understand is what's the human component of that, and what is it that makes me motivated to act, to do something, to get up and say, I can make a difference in my community to help lower energy costs, or I can help communities, help people in my community avoid foreclosures. What is it that makes us do that? And that, I think, is important. The second part I'd add to that is results. How do we measure to outcomes? Not just that more people participated, but that we actually achieved something. Because we know and we recognize, and we've seen research that shows when people participate and they feel like they've achieved something, they tend to come back more often. But just the actual participation is not enough to keep people coming back. So participation, not just for the sake of participation, but participation to achieve some results. And can we show progress on results to get there? And what are the technologies that we can use that can help us measure those results? They're in various formats that I've seen, but it's not very common that you can actually get to showing of results. And certainly in the social community, in the social services community, and certainly in the nonprofit community, these technologies and how technologies can be made cheaper to make that happen would go a really long way, because we talk about the need for data and we talk about the need for information, but that's about where the conversation ends, and we collect data for the sake of collecting data, but we don't actually think about whether the data is useful, how it can be more effective, and are we achieving results. And the results angle, I think, is fairly important for us. And I think when we think about metrics, measuring against results is actually critical for us. And then the last challenge, and I think we face and that we think about a lot, is are we getting this information to all communities? It's easy to get to communities that have access to technology, to computers, to various pieces, but what about low-income communities? What about those families that are so busy that don't have time to check all their technologies because they're too busy getting their kids to school? How do we get them information that's usable in a format that they can do something about? And that is not a small challenge. And I think when we did this conversation at the Department of, when HHS did this conversation on health and making health information more publicly available, especially community health information more publicly available, one of the most interesting conversations that we heard there were from the local community groups of, we don't get this data in a usable format that our communities can do something with it. So while I might know where on the internet to go to find the doctor that can help me solve a certain problem or to ask the right set of questions, it's not always available to low-income communities, and it's not available to all communities. And I don't want to put this into just low-income communities, but I think there's a lot more than low-income communities for us to think about. Immigrant communities, low-income communities, communities that are not necessarily just using the average technologies, but how do we get that information? interest and more publicly available to them, and how can they do something with it to actively participate. And then finally, on open government, I think one of the things that we've done very well is trying to make information as publicly available as possible. This is not a small challenge. I think it's easy to say the terms of open government, more publicly available information, but when you think about that data and the format in which you're collecting it and how you might put it out that's usable, it becomes an expensive prospect. And we're doing it, and it requires a lot of change of thinking and a change of time and a change of people's, change of technology, but also uses of people's time. We need to think about the cost structures, and I think companies think about this all the time. When you make data publicly available or when you improve technology, you spend the money on it. Whereas in the government and shrinking budget environments, you're going to ask that question, which is, where are you going to shrink your budgets when it's, do you supply a service or do you invest in technology? And that's a real trade-off that gets made. And I think it's a question we're thinking about in the collection of the data that can be made more publicly available, but how you can do that easily and more cost effectively, because it's an expense to the government. Not just an expense to the government, it's expensive to nonprofits, it's expensive to those that are that don't always have the money to invest in the technology. So it's a question that I think is worth looking at, but I don't think for that reason we shouldn't do more open government. I think it's critical of what we're doing. But I think to recognize that challenge exists. And the second part of the open government piece, I would say, and I think we all should think about, is for what? We can put a lot of data out there, but if the data isn't being used for something, then we should ask, what's the data being put out for? And if we can't use it to improve application processes, if we can't use it to improve health information to communities, if we can't use it to improve other processes, then we should be asking that question, because just more data out there is not the solution. The question is, what are we doing? What are we going to do with it? And I think the more interesting stuff that's going to be coming out, and Ben, we talked about this outside, is those organizations that will take all this great information that's out there, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on blogs, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Google, wherever you find it, and really analyzing it and giving people more analytical data so they can do something with it. Because one of the things that I know behavioral economics seems to show, and I'd just be interested to see if this plays out, is when people are given too many choices, they make no choices. Or too much information, they choose not to use it. So the question then is if great that we're putting all this information out there, but does that mean people aren't making choices? And if that's true, we should be asking ourselves as to what and how do we make that informationable. And I do think that's going to be an interesting opportunity, actually, to take a lot of really good information and make it usable so you can see trends, so you know what's happening or what might be coming, or what are trends showing in Twitter, what are trends showing on the blogs, so we can use that information from a policy perspective and think whether do these trends actually match up, that we might be able to do something with it. And I think that'll be a huge, interesting opportunity. But let me stop there, because I think it would be much more interesting if we had a conversation about some of these things.
Thank you, Sono. So we've had a comprehensive presentation, comprehensive responses with some clear suggestions for more research. I'm now going to bring Ginny Hunt from Google into the conversation, and then perhaps offer Ben and Ginny a chance to respond to Sono's points. So, Ginny, you work at Google Research. Can you share some of the items you've been working on, and perhaps from your sort of product-based perspective, what you see as the most important technology-mediated social participation research areas?
Yes, well, to approach that in a couple of ways. One, I would say this is a very important topic, and I think a very important time. Both in terms of where we are as a country, and where we are also in terms of capabilities, both as citizens, our access to technology, our access to information. And the question is what we all choose to do with that. So I think, as Sonal, Ben, and Ginny said, is in many ways we're best positioned now to start solving some of these challenging problems. The question is, what can we leverage from companies, from the private sector, from academia, and frankly within communities, to help those within communities currently solving problems do so better. On our end, we have a couple of different platforms that we work on. One is called Google Moderator, a crowdsourcing platform that lets people submit and rank different ideas, suggestions, and questions, and it's in Google Labs. And one of the interesting things that we're starting to look at are a lot of the research questions that are being addressed here, which include, who comes just to read what others have submitted, but also vote, which is a strong signal for us because voting helps with ranking. And voting helps us understand what does the community care about, which is not always an easy problem to solve efficiently. But it's also used in ways, as Sonal said, to create outcomes. So, for example, a group of Chinese netizens used the platform to put questions to the Dalai Lama. And this was enabled by using Google Translate, and the Dalai Lama responded. And part of what the question was, is how do we create platforms and systems that actually result in a conversation or an outcome or a deeper level of engagement that wasn't previously possible. So that's something we're very interested in. I think another element that Sonal hit upon in your closing comments that was also highlighted by Ben and Jenny was we currently do have a robust amount of platforms and analytical tools. I think the question is how are we enabling all citizens, particularly starting with younger Americans, to have computational thinking skills to address problems, decompose problems, and come up with algorithms, frankly, to solve social problems in smarter ways. And I think in many ways this is happening offline. It's how those within communities do currently solve problems. We haven't applied those to technology as much as we should and could. So I think that's an interesting area for this to go. So I'll leave it there so we can have a broader conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny. It's very interesting. So, Jenny or Ben, Sonal mentioned questions of behavioral economics, measuring outcomes and analysis as possible research areas. Do you have any comments or going to comment more broadly?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to actually address the access one, though, first, while I remember about it, because I think the access is just incredibly important. And I think it is right that, many of us, it's very easy for us to sort of sit with our own computers and assume that everybody has computers. And I think that one of the things about access is important is not just that people have access to the technology, but that they have access to the technology in places where where they feel really comfortable and where it's really useful for them to have that access and where they get help from others. I'm not a librarian myself, but I have over 300 library students in my school and quite a lot of research happening in that area. And one of the interesting and very fascinating things that I think came out of some of the studies after the Katrina disaster was that the libraries that were still standing, of course, were the places that very, very many people went to. They went there because they knew them, and they went there to get information about their family, their friends, and how to find out for help. And they went there partly for that information, but also because they really trusted the people there. They really trusted the people in those centers. They knew them, and they felt very comfortable going there. So that was the first thing that I wanted to mention. So I think access, but access within certain contexts, social and physical, is also important.
I was very pleased, Sonal Shaw emphasized action, and as Washington shifts from think tanks to do tanks and from collective intelligence to collective action, I think we're seeing a change that's very positive. It's very heartening to see what's coming out of the administration these days. Your encouragement to behavioral economics, economists, is just right. I mean, I think of the book Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein, of course, come into the administration, but that book is a book about user interface design, or at least this choice design, as they would describe it. But it talks exactly about these issues, about how one influences the design of the technology, and then it influences our behaviors in very profound ways. I also completely support your encouragement to think about how accessibility for low-income users, and I just want to point out one of the participants of our workshop was Keith Hampton, a researcher at University of Pennsylvania, who's a hero for having launched iNeighbors. Some 80,000 people participate, and his latest study shows a very hopeful result, which is that the low-income communities were beneficiaries as much as the high-income communities, that the people in the low-income communities who had computers did the jobs for many, and that the payoffs were just as positive for the low-income as for the high-income community. So understanding these and understand how to design these to have those positive effects come out more often, and, as you so rightly say, measuring results, not just promises. So I think we're on the similar belief that there are many hopeful signs. The measurements, take a look at Amber Alert. 8 million people have it on their desktop. It's now a DOJ run effort, and at least 500 kids who have been abducted were found in part because of Amber Alert, and maybe thousands prevented from being abducted because of that kind of effort. One after another, the stories of successes make us feel there's something here, but the successes get told very often, the failures don't get told. And we do need to have the kind of careful research, I think, that will help us understand what are the determinants of success and what are the metrics of success. And, if the mega contribs and giga collabs are a starter, but I certainly want to see the mega number of hospital days without errors, and the number of safe journeys in troubled neighborhoods would be the other ways we would measure the success of this technology.
Great, thanks. So you talked about measuring outcomes, and do you have any examples of particular successes or failures, as Ben was mentioning, that come to mind around technology? Or perhaps Ginny, I know you did some work about health back a year or two ago in the swine flu.
Oh, right. Well, and Google has done work around health and trends within research. It's less, so colleagues have worked on that. In terms of outcomes and measuring results, I think something that's so interesting that'll be useful for this research, and one area we might be lacking in terms of data is really conversion rates. How do we see that social service delivery has increased the number of conversion rates, and reduces the steps it takes? For example, we've looked at student financial aid. How many steps does it take for a student in the U.S., a high school student, to actually apply and receive financial aid? And why are there other for-profit platforms that are out competing some of the federal agency websites? So I think that there's some interesting ways that we could begin to better design around conversion rates and outcomes. One interesting note on access is we just recently had a community training of citizen cartographers in the largest slum in Nairobi to help them actually generate a community map of their schools, of their healthy water sources, of their health service locations. And I think what was powerful about that, as one example to show how access can be created, was they were brought into a facility with computers and given actual training so they could train others. And what they chose to map were things that they felt were the important underpinnings of their community. And I think that's where we begin to see the powerful and successful results of how social participation can produce much better outcomes. But I'll let Sonal speak to other metrics.
I think we actually, I can name a few, but I think there's actually quite a few in communities. Just recently, I think the Social Innovation Fund funded a few grants where one particularly to the United Way of Greater Cincinnati, where the community came together and decided, both from nonprofits to businesses to the university itself, came together and decided they could close the achievement gap of African American students and white students, and they did within a 6-year period because they actually created a roadmap of how they could do that. Now, the point here would not be we could find a lot of these successes because I think they exist throughout in communities. The question is, how do we find those successes and how do we help scale them, and where can technology help them improve greater participation? So United Way of Greater Cincinnati and University of Cincinnati are looking to scale their programs, but here is an opportunity to say, how can we look at social participation to make this happen greater, and how can communities take their own action based on what one community has done? Because it wasn't a grand plan. It was the fact that they all came together to figure this out themselves, and it was a participation exercise that made that happen. And so, and there's several of these examples like that. And I think here, and I agree with Ginny, I think it's finding those successes and then saying, elevating them, scaling them, and giving them voice so people know what else they can do. Not that this is the only model to use, but there are, to Ben's point, there are parameters that made it work. And what are the parameters you can use to make it work better?
And speaking to that, in terms of the health example around trends, it was looking at search signals to actually create better and earlier predictions around when the flu was moving into communities based upon what people were searching for. And what's interesting, if we think about how that applies, for example, to 311 data. Recently in New York, there's an interesting article around New York City's 311 system and how the calls they're receiving, and each of which is really a data point, could help better predict. For example, on Tuesday, most people need to know in the morning which side of the street to park on. Well, and in that way we could, create an alert for folks on Tuesdays to say, it's on the left side today. And you reduce the volume of calls, which creates sort of a more efficient system. I mean, that's one example, but there are also larger signals that those calls help create if we use each of these data points to create better predictive models. And it might not necessarily apply for all urban areas, but a chance is there could be some insights there.
I've got an idea going through my mind around competitions and the use of competitions to do this, and from one side of things, and the other is sort of participant research, very active research, and both a competition in a good way domestically, and then this sort of question of an international arms race around this, and this being a national competency for competitiveness. And I wonder if, Ben, you have any thoughts on competitions or participant research? Or
well, there's two parts there, but certainly the Obama administration has moved down the road of making competitions part of the ecosystem. The 12-page memorandum, as Jeff Zients from OMB outlined how each agency could run competitions. I think there's possibilities there. I have some cautions, though, as well. I mean, I think the Apps for Democracy that Vivek Kundra ran in D.C. now 3 years ago were, produced some benefits, but I think we have to be a little bit more careful in taking things that are national priorities rather than discretionary things, that they be tested, that somebody's got to, once it's delivered, somebody's got to maintain it, expand it. I'm not sure how far you can go with the kind of open competition model, although I think it's worth giving that a try. We're involved with competition of a medical app store. This is with Harvard University on one of the SHARP projects, and there's to be a competition during the spring. I'm on the judge panel to select the best medical applications, and I think those are worthwhile trying. Your other point was about international efforts, and I know you've taken a strong effort, and the web page you created for part of our group was cataloging international efforts for open government and for social media. And indeed, this is an international effort. In England, it's called Web Science, and Tim Berners-Lee and Dame Wendy Hall and others have been promoting this effort, and large funding has been put aside for this. The European Union has a group that's looked at socially embedded technologies, written a manifesto that's quite well aligned with what we've got here. And in China, of course, there's a centralized effort, but there are whole laboratories of social media established with 75 researchers in one shot, because they, of course, understand the power of social media. We may sometimes differ with their political orientation, but they certainly are putting a major national effort along this topic.
I'm going to just, Preston, if you can get ready with the mic, and we'll take questions. But Ginny, you say...
it was interesting when you were talking about that. It makes us think that almost a social participation supply chain seems a bit helpful, because I think one of the things that Sonal hit upon, I think others have highlighted, whether it's a contest or other ways to engage people, is when people are busy, when people who might have the right insights or talents don't know the most efficient way to participate in the process, what they hopefully can better understand is, when do we need the people who are geologists? Or during the Haiti disaster relief, when are certain experts and expertise best and most useful in the process? Because I think that'll be interesting to start, and hopefully through the research that you're doing, it'll better discern to engage more people at the right times, so that those with less time and greater expertise can be involved.
Okay, and Ginny?
I just wanted to respond to both Ginny and Sonal. I loved the tying together. Was something that was that you mentioned that I thought was just so important. The measurement of outcomes linked with the value to the community and linked with motivation to the community to do more. And I thought that tying together of those three things is just so significant. Measurement for measurement's sake. I mean, I think we've all at various times in our lives seen too much of that, but this tying together in that way is really central and fundamental.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Questions? Gentleman at the back. And please introduce yourself.
Sure. Lucas Chaffee with the Open Government Community Summit series. I wanted to pick up on the definition of public participation that Ms. Shah brought up. I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you see the public participation moving forward. In the Open Government Memorandum 2009, the definition was something sort of executive departments and agencies should offer Americans increased opportunities to participate in policymaking and to provide the government with the benefits of their collective expertise. Are we moving down the road towards more citizen participation in policymaking, or are we limited to just commenting on websites? Is that all we have, or can we move further in terms of public participation in policymaking?
Thank you.
And that's a great question, and I think I think we're trying to move in multiple directions, and I think on one hand, the federal government is trying to use technology more to get information earlier and to get participation earlier. One of the things, I'll be honest, that we've learned is almost just getting out to the field and asking those questions is almost more important than just putting it on a site. And what we found is getting out to communities, hosting meetings and then asking people to participate has been much more valuable than just the technology out there that's been out there. But the technology is an important part of it to at least make that information available and also get comments earlier. And I think while we're moving in the context of new technologies, I don't think we should dismiss some of the old technologies and the old things that are out there already. So every agency that is making competitions publicly available has a notice of funding opportunity, and most all of them leave it open for 30 days for comment, and they use that information and the comments that come in to make changes to the notice of funding opportunity. So they take into account what the comments were from the community that chose to participate. And that, I think, is the part that I would like to emphasize, is that not everyone chooses to participate. And not everyone chooses to look up that information of a project that they're interested in, knowing when that funding opportunity is coming available. And by the way, I'm by no means going to say it's the easiest thing in the world to find when all these funding opportunities are coming available. But for those that are interested in it, they actually can participate in it. So the old systems that do exist actually have been working, and people do use them, but we need more participation in them. Even in the new systems, we need people to participate. Even when we've put information out, communities that tend to be online all the time tend to always respond. But what we need sometimes is more a diversity of response. And what we found through agencies and whether it's a Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, Corporation for National and Community Service, it really has been when we've gone out to communities and convened conversations that we've gotten more robust participation. So it happens. I'm not sure we always know about it, maybe because we're not always looking for where it is. And I think we could probably do a better job of showing where it's happening on a constant basis. But I think what the Open Gov plan actually did was made agencies actually think about how they're doing it, not just the fact that we're already doing it, but consciously thinking about that. And I'll give you one example, which was the I3 fund at the Department of Education. They actually went a fairly long way of not only making that competition open, they've put the reviews online, they've put the ratings online, they've put the applications online, and that's actually made a lot of people uncomfortable. It certainly made the participants who are applying very uncomfortable, because now people know what their ratings were, and if they're looking for applications from other foundations, it makes that more publicly available. So it's an uncomfortable position. It frankly makes reviewers uncomfortable because their ratings are now being made public. And it is a question that we have to ask ourselves, which is, if we want to consistently get reviewers we want to be honest, and we're going to make their comments publicly available, will they participate again? And are we starting to limit those pools? Because on one hand, we want frank comments. On the other hand, we don't want to make them we don't want to make them uncomfortable that they live in these communities that they would participate in. So these are not, I'm not making excuses for it. I'm just saying these are challenges that we consistently have to work through to figure out what's the best way of a competition to make that information publicly available. But these are the questions that we grapple with, and we continue to grapple with both internally and externally with our colleagues to figure out what are the best ways of doing this. Again, to say what's the outcome we want to get to, which in I3 and certainly in the Social Innovation Fund, I think the outcome is more applications, better applications, and those that can meet the threshold of competing on a constant basis. That would be the ultimate outcome, because that would make this decision making smarter, and it would make it a better process. But we have to constantly think about that, because otherwise you constantly get pinged on, you didn't do this well enough, you didn't do this enough, you could have done more. And yes, we could have done a lot of things better, but we constantly grapple with those questions of, are we limiting the pool of reviewers that we can get? Are we getting the comments that we need from the right groups so everybody's participating in it? And are the applications eventually going to get better?
I support your request for greater participation in policymaking, but I was surprised by your comment that you were wondering if it's limited to commenting on websites, was what you said. That can be very powerful. Yesterday at the Brookings Institution, there was a half-day symposium about e-rulemaking and input from citizens. Commenting on a website can be a very powerful approach. The peer-to-patent experience Beth Novak ran with USPTO is another interesting way in which comments on websites provided valuable information, measurably improving the process of patent review. So I think I would like to say there are different kinds of commenting on websites, and if the procedure is well structured, comments on websites from a large number of well-informed people can be very powerful.
The lady in the light. Sure.
Oh, thank you. I'm Cynthia Farina from Cornell, and I actually have a question that follows on very nicely to that, I guess an observation. I would hope that one of the research questions that gets a fair amount of attention is how we can help government determine what the smartest investment in social computing is. I'm part of a project that's working on e-rulemaking. We actually have a participation platform that we use with the Department of Transportation. And rulemaking is an area that the federal government has been trying to use online participation to improve for almost 15 years. And it has not worked. And a lot of what we're doing is trying to figure out how can we avoid replicating that when we get to rulemaking 2.0. But I think our preliminary conclusion, at least, is this is a very tough area to get participation in, to get meaningful participation in. And that suggests that it may not be the best place for agencies with limited resources to invest those resources in. But I think that it seems to me that's a really important research question. How do we help give government guidance in what is the most effective, particularly in the area of public participation?
Do you have a quick response, or would you?
Well, sure. I mean, that's the central question we leave here. How do you motivate people? You've got a particular case to contribute to e-rulemaking. Okay. What are the motivations? You've talked about negative motivations, about being visible, public, and so on. Why do I contribute as a reviewer of an NSF proposal? Why does someone contribute their efforts? It has to be well structured enough that it benefits them professionally in an effective way, that they can be influential, they can be connected to key players in the field, that it serves their needs. If it's an assistant professor in a field who's seeking tenure, you've got to structure it in a way that gives them the credibility that supports their goals. And so I think that's what we're all struggling. We don't have the answers, but it's clear, and you highlighted also that understanding motivation in these different environments. Jenny pointed out the difference between healthcare as opposed to Wikipedia as really a deep question.
Cheryl, the lady in the grey.
sorry. Can I just hold it? I promise to give it back. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Lianza, and I am the co-chair of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Media and Telecom Task Force. And I was really gratified to hear some of the focus this afternoon on serving particularly low-income communities, immigrant communities. One of the things that the Leadership Conference has started to grapple with, mostly within the context of looking at broadband deployment, you know, what will promote broadband deployment, how we can get broadband to all these communities. Apparently, am I cutting in and out? Maybe I should have left you hold it. Was how to get broadband to these communities. But one of the things that we started to look at was these communities' experience online often starts through benefits provision from federal benefits programs. How do you get your unemployment insurance? It's either state or federal. How do you get your unemployment insurance online? How do you intersect with the immigration authorities? You know, that gives the initial motivation to just for somebody who's really not connected to be connected. But one of the things that we've started to see as we explored this is that things are all over the map in the states, and the standards are all over the map, and it's not clear, you know, how these benefits, how they get provided. It's not clear whether people's, you know, the basic privacy things their basic privacy rights are being protected. So we're starting to explore this question of how to do this, and I was, you know, how to sort of address it as a macro level. And I was wondering if you had all looked at this sort of set of questions, if you have seen any analysis of how these benefits programs are provided successfully online, when it's successful to reach these particularly tenuous, vulnerable communities, when it hasn't been successful, as sort of looking at it as a first step, I would think, of a broader, more civic participation. Like first, if you can just get your unemployment insurance online, that might be your first step. Then later, you might actually be able to comment on how to improve the system so that, you know, it would help you more. So and we are still looking, to be honest, to see more of this broad-based analysis of how the government provides these benefits online. I wondered if you guys had seen that.
I can't answer your question, but I can afterwards give you the names of two researchers, John Bateau and Paul Yeager, who are involved in quite big projects sponsored by the American Library Association and also sponsored by the Gates Foundation. And they are very specifically looking at many of these issues. And as I mentioned earlier, I think this is one of the roles for libraries. So, you know, if you ever start to think about cutting back on your library subscriptions or your local library, please forget it quickly, because these are areas where many of the people that you've just described go to for help and go back again. So I give you those names afterwards and contacts for them.
I'll also take the liberty of mentioning a little bit of our research here, and that we've found that in a couple of places the libraries have lines out of the door with people wanting to get in line, and it supports the idea that libraries are comfortable places to work. And the other side is that we went to one in Scranton, in the Wilkes-Barre area. We had a small round table where one person advised everyone else that you can actually get citizens to support special levies to pay for libraries because it is they are that popular. And just on a more general note around media literacy, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Charlie Firestone's report, Nicole Turner-Lee's report that came out last week or the week before. Oh, about to come out and is very good, because I saw a pre-release. But look for it. Next question, the gentleman here on the left.
Turo Dexter from the Strategic Planning Group at Housing. Am I doing that? Okay. I liked what Ms. Shaw said about collecting information on how open government data is being used. I hope very much, even while we're grasping for that information, we continue to put that data out there, because it's got to be there for a while before people realize, hey, I can use this. But it would be nice to have an initiative where we started regularly on those data portals providing mechanisms for people to post descriptions of what they're doing with it, links to their sites that would give other people good ideas as well.
I think in some agencies that's happening. I know at HHS, I think probably about 4 or 5 months ago, they made this data publicly available, and then they asked a group of nonprofits, foundations, and businesses to look at this data and mash it up in different ways so people could see how communities could use the data. And I think I would say one of the things that we need to do as a government is figure out more creative ways to ask communities to participate with us. And I don't mean communities just in local communities, but I mean technology communities, nonprofit communities, business communities, to really participate with us with how that data could be used differently, and really pushing them to think about what more could be useful, what more could be put out there in more usable formats that can make a difference. Because we are going to put more data out. That's not gonna change, and frankly, we should. There's no reason we should be sitting on most of the data that we're sitting on. But I think it would be helpful to know what data is also useful. So when we start collecting other data, we're actually collecting data that's useful, that can make it easier for communities to make smarter decisions. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's more we can do, and there's more we should be doing. And that idea of those sites is actually not a bad idea for us to think about as a government, to see if we can see and show others what's happening with it. So maybe we can galvanize more people doing that. To date, I think we've asked outside groups to do it, but we should think about how to bring some of that in.
Question: the gentleman, the blue shirt or the green tie. That's you, sir. Yes. Yes.
Here. Thanks very much. Rob Stewart, the Evolve Foundation. Fascinating discussion. Pleased to be part of it. I'm struck, though, because it was mentioned this is the week of WikiLeaks, that so much of the media's job, perceived job, is to expose what the government's not telling us. And I deal with reporters, and I'm actually a proponent of and a strong user of SeeClickFix, which I don't know if people know about SeeClickFix. I cannot get the newspaper to write a story about things that are being fixed in SeeClickFix. So I wonder, just as a softball, what can we do in terms of the media's role in shaping a lot of citizens' attitude about what they should be engaging in?
Well, I will say, I've just last month did a sort of a road show to different newsrooms, talking to them about how we can do a better job giving journalists and reporters easier access and easier ways to visualize information. I think we've done a great job in terms of the technology space to democratize publishing platforms, commerce online, but we haven't done a great job in giving journalists or citizens easy ways to visualize and understand data and information in ways that help tell stories and illustrate stories. So I think that it's an area that should be strongly pushed. I know Ben was speaking about his work around data visualization we were talking about earlier in the health space, and I think the next, Ben Schneidermans and Hans and Ola Roslings are what we should be looking for, both within the community of journalists and also within students right now. I'm sure the iSchool, or your information school, is teaming with interesting graduate students who could do a great job illustrating this information. But I agree, it should be a big part of the challenge that we address collectively. Okay. So you can.
Yeah. Thanks for the softball.
Right.
Yeah, visualization is my research area, and I'm just very gratified, pleased to see and celebrate the good work of the New York Times. Matt Erickson and his crew over the last 4 or 5 years have done wonderful things, and now I'm very pleased. Recently, the Washington Post has come along and begun to do things as of starting in August, much more ambitiously with Karen Urish's effort. BBC, CNN are all beginning to use more and more visualization tools, and I'm pleased to have contributed to recovery.gov in making their website accessible to a wide range of people to explore data in a rich way. So these graphic visualizations that expose the issues of healthcare disparities, for example, I think are very powerful ways. I guess, I'm sympathetic to your plaint about why can't you get your newspapers to talk about some success stories. I'd like to know that one too. I guess we need failures. Failures make better news than success stories, but if you can help us tell the stories, let's do it. Yeah.
Great. So I promised people sort of 4:45, so we'll take the last couple of questions together and then final comments, and we'll wrap it up. So this gentleman there, and then the gentleman in front.
Thank you. Raghuveer Goel, India Global Asia Today. My question is that many people are now asking, as far as WikiLeaks is concerned, should we go back old days when you used to write letters and email? There was no email, there were no WikiLeaks, or there were no computers or Google. I mean, how to keep the secret now? Many Americans now, many people around the globe are now asking, because nothing can be now kept secret as far as whether it's a personal or anything goes on as far as this WikiLeaks is concerned. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here in a world of open information? And the gentleman at the front will take this question at the same time and then have...
Thanks. Robert Damashek from Binary Group, DoD-CIO. Ben alluded to the equation of the value to the participant. And I think Jenny talked about trust. I think this is all really tied together here. And how, has there been study on different parameters generalized that could be included in this trust equation? Is it meeting my need? Am I being listened to? You know, I'm familiar with some of the work out at Stanford and others on the parameters of what's involved here. I'd like to see more of a foundation gone into this, and that work could be promoted by your office potentially to establish this across the government. So perhaps left to right. Jenny, have you any comments on trust or a world of open data and WikiLeaks?
Which shall I take? I'll talk a minute or two about trust. I think there is quite a lot of foundational work on trust. I, a number of years ago, worked on empathy, and I think the sort of flip side of trust is actually empathy. So it is extremely important. And in fact, if you look at some of the literature coming out of psychotherapy, what you find is that people are not quite sure if trust leads to empathy or empathy leads to trust. That indicates just how strongly they are bound together. So I think this issue of trust is extremely important. I think it brings on empathy. Empathy brings people together. People coming together bring other people together. So there are I think, sort of two, probably more, really important things to consider in trust in this way. And one is, you know, the trust of the technology. Is it really as private as I think it is, for example? And we all remember, I think, from about January, February, the huge number of privacy settings that were required on Facebook, and they've now trimmed that back. So there's those issues of privacy. You know, do I trust my technology to behave in the way I expect it to behave? And then I think the other one is, do I trust the people who are using that technology? And there's a lot of work that's gone into, you know, people's identity, for example, how you can show a consistent identity online, but not your own identity. But if you keep that identity consistent, you always appear as whatever the icon is, then that helps to build trust. You don't keep changing. So there is a body of that work. But trust in the technology and trust in the people and the link, the connections between those two are, I think, extremely important.
Ben or someone? Ben?
Well, you know, I think you ask a great question, and I think that is probably the fundamental question from a government perspective of the trust, and how do you get people to trust what they're doing is actually going to be used well. We're not going to misuse it. And I think from a government perspective, that's certainly the question we always get asked, right? Privacy is probably the primo concern that everybody has, while for some reason, people don't seem to be concerned that Facebook and Google have all their information. They seem to be very concerned that government has all their information. And we have some sense of trust there. It's an interesting question, actually, of the trust we put in private companies to have our information, but not the trust we would put in government. And that is the primo question that we all get asked as government. And I know you probably more than anybody get that. But it is a question, I think from a research perspective, that would be fantastic for all of us to have, that as they do some of this research on trust, empathy, to then get that information and spread it throughout government. So when we think about data, when we think about collecting data or information, we start using that information effectively, knowing that.
And it may also be an element of why when you go out face to face, you're getting better interaction because there is that.
Right. There's a trust when they see a person. There's not necessarily a trust when they see a website, and so that's a very great point. So I mean, if there's any emphasis I would put here, I think the value of research, and I think, Tom, the paper you all put out more of that is actually valuable in the world, because from a policy perspective, it helps to have information out there that we can refer to of what the data and what others are saying, but also from what's the research showing. Because if we're going to spend this money and if we're going to do more, having the research that shows it can help with greater participation, that we can actually increase participation, or to the question that was asked before, that we know what's not working and we should probably not do the things that aren't working also, that would actually go a really long way, I think, from a perspective of government, because it's not that simple to just test new technologies on a regular basis, but it is something that the research would help a ton with.
Ginny, any further comments? Or?
I mean, I would agree and sort of echo what has been said. One, I think the call for more research is very important in this space. I think it's exciting to see, particularly the articles in here, so I would encourage everyone to pick this up. But I think the question is how can, because this is a cross-sector set of problems that we can help solve, the question is how can we participate in useful ways as you begin to do more research in this area. And then I would also just finally say, I think as Sonal and others have mentioned, all of our goals should be to help people solve problems in their communities and participate in solving those problems in the most accessible and useful ways as possible. So I think if this research and collective efforts move towards that, we've all been successful.
Any final comments, Ben?
Well, I'm gratified that there's support for more research, and I think one of the things the research community would like is closer connection with the government agencies doing it and the companies doing it, so that we could participate in the evaluation process. I think what the academic community brings to you is the chance, the strategies and the methods, and also the objectivity possibly of an outside view that would validate what's working for the Open Government Directive, what could be better, and what's working for industry and what could be better. If you invite the community in, we will come.
So with that, I'll thank everyone for coming and thank the speakers and for speaking. And with that, please raise it. Thank you.